So this is the Renin-Angiotensin-Aldosterone System. We call it the RAAS. It's super high yield for kidney physiology. So be sure to know this. So the whole function of this is to regulate blood pressure. Specifically, it's to increase blood pressure when you have decreased blood pressure. So then the trigger then is either hypotension or hypovolemia. And this is going to be sensed in two parts of the body. It's going to be sensed by the kidneys. It's going to be sensed by the aortic and carotid baroreceptors, which we talked about in the neural section. So these baroreceptors are going to sense that decreased vessel distension, and then they're going to respond by increasing sympathetic tone. And then the way the renal hyperperfusion works is there's going to be two methods for sensing this. There's going to be decreased pressure in the afferent arterioles, and then also if there's decreased perfusion, there's going to be decreased sodium chloride delivery to the macula densa. That's part of the kidney. It's in the distal ascending limb of the loop of Henle. So all of these different inputs are going to be sensed by the juxtaglomerular cells of the nephrons, and then these cells are in response. They're going to release renin. So renin is a hormone, and its function is to convert angiotensin into angiotensin 1. Okay. So basically, low blood pressure causes renin release. Renin converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin to angiotensin 1. And then now we have the ACE enzyme. It's the angiotensin converting enzyme. It's in the lungs. It's going to take angiotensin 1, convert it to angiotensin 2. This one is important, this ACE enzyme, because that's where the ACE inhibitor medication will work. Okay, ACE inhibitors obviously then inhibit the ACE enzyme and prevents conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. And then your angiotensin 2 is the active hormone. It's going to do a variety of things to increase blood pressure. Okay, it's going to act in many different organs. Number one, it's going to act in the smooth muscle of the vessels. It's going to cause vasoconstriction. So vasoconstriction increases blood pressure. Number two, it's going to act on the adrenal cortex to increase aldosterone release. And aldosterone, as you know by now, will increase that sodium reabsorption in the collecting ducts, and thus increase blood pressure. Number three, it's going to act on the kidney itself, and it's going to increase sodium absorption. Okay, so it's going to increase sodium absorption in two ways: directly on the kidney and through aldosterone release in the renal cortex. It also acts on the kidney to cause efferent arterial vasoconstriction. Do you remember why we would want this? How does this affect GFR when you vasoconstrict that efferent arterial? Remember, you're increasing the GFR because more blood will be in the glomerular capillaries and less will leave through the efferent arterioles. Remember, what was the mnemonic that we said for this? Angiotensin 2 constricts the renal arterioles. Angiotensin 2 is ACE. And again, you see that ACE again, that's how you remember it. Okay, and finally, you can increase thirst in the hypothalamus, and all of these serve to increase blood pressure and maintain the GFR. So it's a beautiful system. It works very well to help you increase your blood pressure when you sense decreased blood pressure. Now, I promised you I'll talk about the Juxtaglomerular Apparatus, which was right here. So we're going to be talking about this now. So this is the function is to regulate blood pressure and maintain filtration rate of the glomerulus. And again, it's through that Renin-Angiotensin-Aldosterone System. And this here is the Juxtaglomerular Apparatus. It's composed of three different things. We're looking at the glomerulus here. Three different cells make up this apparatus. Number one, juxtaglomerular cells. Okay, these are here. These are in between the afferent, and then the efferent arterioles. Juxtaglomerular cells are modified smooth muscle cells of the afferent arteriole. Modified smooth muscle cells of the afferent arteriole. They respond to two things: sympathetic stimulation. Do you remember? I just told you, where does this sympathetic stimulation comes from? What triggers it? Remember, it's the baroreceptors in the aorta and the carotid. And then they also measure blood pressure in the afferent arteriole, so they will respond to decreased blood pressure in the afferent arteriole. Okay, and again, they will secrete renin in response to either of these. Okay, so these are smooth muscle cells of the afferent arteriole. They can respond to decreased blood pressure here in the afferent arteriole or to sympathetic stimulation. Next, we have mesangial cells. Not much to say about them. Mesangium is just It's like specialized tissue in the glomerulus, mesangial cells. There's tissues there. And finally, we have the macula densa. Macula densa, I told you, was a group of cells in the distal end of the loop of Henle, and these sense the sodium chloride levels. So this is the loop of Henle right here, and it's back by the glomerulus because, as you remember, it goes down and the loop of Henle goes back up. Again, they sense sodium chloride delivery. So decreased sodium chloride delivery means there's hypoperfusion of the kidney, and so you're going to release renin. Again, but all of these lead to release of renin from the juxtaglomerular cells. Alright, now I'm going to test you on, this is going to be a synthesis of both renal tubular defect problems as well as the Renin-Angiotensin system. So if you don't know, please go back, watch the video for the renal tubular defects. But for Bartter syndrome, what was the problem here? Do you remember the problem with Bartter syndrome? It's alphabetical order, so Bartter syndrome was the loop of Henle. You have decreased sodium reabsorption, that sodium potassium chloride transporter. Now, you might be tempted to think that there would be decreased blood pressure here. But if I just told you about this Renin-Angiotensin system, so you have so initially you do have some decreased blood pressure because you have decreased sodium reabsorption. But that's going to kick in what's going to happen to your Renin-Angiotensin system. This one goes up. Remember, again, juxtaglomerular cell, what's going to happen is that it's going to secrete renin. And then renin, what's going to happen? Renin activates angiotensin to angiotensin 1, and then you have the rest of your loop cascade. So angiotensin 1 goes to angiotensin 2 thanks to ACE in the lungs. And then angiotensin 2 will do its variety of functions. Actually, why don't you just try to remember the variety of functions from angiotensin 2? Remember, acts on the smooth muscle, vasoconstriction. Acts on the adrenal cortex, aldosterone. Acts on the kidney directly, sodium absorption, efferent arterial constriction, when that's ACE. Okay? So all of that happens, and then you will have a nice balanced blood pressure. Okay. What about urine magnesium, urine calcium? Remember what happens? Remember, this is basically like chronic loop diuretic use. You're going to be decreasing that the potassium back leak. You're going to decrease the lumen potential in the tubules of the kidney. So there's going to be decreased reabsorption, so there's going to be more left in the urine, so there's going to be increased urine calcium. Okay, and just ignore this. Okay, next is Gittleman syndrome, or if you want to call it, we can call it urine magnesium. As a typo, that goes up. So Gittleman syndrome, what's the deal here? Again, you have diuresis, decreased blood pressure initially, activate this, blood pressure becomes normal. What does urine calcium do? Remember we talked about this is another review. But Gittleman syndrome blocks that sodium transporter. Sodium chloride blocked. Decreased sodium inside the cell. Remember now we also have this sodium calcium transporter. So this is increased because there's an increased gradient now. So this will also increase. So you have increased calcium reabsorption. So urine calcium goes down. So calcium here goes into, there's less calcium in the urine, in the lumen. Little and Same syndrome, what are the problems here? Do you remember the problems in Little syndrome? That's overactive sodium transporter in the collecting ducts. Okay, and Same was pretty much the same idea except for overactive mineralocorticoid receptor, which will increase the sodium absorption. Okay, if you have increased sodium absorption, what's going to happen to your blood pressure? Blood pressure goes up. What's going to happen to your renin? Remember, there's going to be decreased stimulus for this secretion. The stimulus is low blood pressure. So renin goes down, what's going to happen to aldosterone? Well, aldosterone is downstream of renin. Aldosterone is also decreased. Okay, what about SAIDH? What is the problem here? SAIDH is too much ADH. ADH, what was its function? ADH function was to put aquaporin channels in the collecting ducts for water reabsorption. So if you have too much water reabsorption, you may get a little bit of increased blood pressure, but usually it might be okay too, because remember, it's sodium that really governs that blood pressure. But what is going to happen? Let's say you have this increased blood pressure. What is going to happen? Again, there's decreased impetus for this renin production. There's decreased renin secretion from the Juxtaglomerular Apparatus. So renin goes down, and then again downstream aldosterone goes down. Finally, what is primary hyperaldosteronism? Primary hyperaldosteronism, the whole problem here is overproduction of aldosterone. That's why it's primary. So things like an aldosterone producing tumor in the adrenal cortex or bilateral adrenal hyperplasia, both of these can cause increased aldosterone production. And what's going to happen? Aldosterone causes increased sodium reabsorption, increased blood pressure. Increased blood pressure, what happens to renin? What happens to that renin-angiotensin axis? It's going to go down. Okay, so less renin. Okay. Secondary hyperaldosteronism. What's the problem here? Secondary hyperaldosteronism, the whole definition of this is increased aldosterone, okay? But it's secondary to another problem. It's going to be another problem that's going to be activating that renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So in that case, if your renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system is activated, you're going to have increased renin. So things like that, things that can cause this are something like a renin secreting tumor, so a tumor that makes a bunch of renin, which is going to increase your aldosterone. Something like renal vascular hypertension. So what that is, I just want to explain this briefly, is you have your kidney, and then you have your vessels, your blood perfusion. But if you have obstruction of this kidney, there's going to be less blood perfusing through it. And so what did we say? Remember the Juxtaglomerular Apparatus will detect how much blood is going into the kidney. If you have blockage here, it's going to detect much less. It's going to think you're very low blood pressure. It's going to activate this renin and aldosterone. Unfortunately, you actually don't have no low blood pressure. You originally had normal blood pressure, and thanks to this activation of this RAAS, you're going to have increased blood pressure. Okay, so that can be a problem. So that's it. Please don't memorize anything. Please understand everything again. It's all pretty simple stuff. Make sure you know all the functions of the renin-angiotensin system. And that's it.